welcome. We're super excited to have people joining for, a voice from the young adults. And I am just really excited to have met both AYA, Association of Young Americans, and Young Invincibles over the last, I think I met Young Invincibles about 8 years ago. And then AYA, we got associated with Ben Brown, one of the founders, about 4 years ago, and he spoke at Close It in Austin. So just really excited. I think we all know that the future is about their voice, the young voice, the youth voice, and it's also something that's really hard to capture. So I'm just really thrilled to have two organizations that have captured that voice and are doing great work in that area. Lisa Giordano is the executive director of Association of Young Americans. And I believe, Lisa, why don't you just tell us, a little bit about AYA, how many members and what you all are doing?
Yeah, well, it's nice to see all of you here. Thank you for coming. The Association of Young Americans started in 2016, and we are a membership-based organization that basically has the single goal of increasing young people's voice in politics. So we currently have 34,000 members, which is really exciting. And we brought on our first lobbyist in 2017, a year after we were founded, and that is Allie. So you'll be meeting her soon. And yeah, we work on a specific policy platform, specific issues that are important to young people, from higher education and workforce development to climate change and healthcare. So yeah, we work hard to get specific policies and legislation passed that will improve the lives of young people, and we advocate for the voices of our members every day in Washington. So yeah, it's great to be here with you all, and I'm excited to be a part of this discussion.
That's awesome. Thank you. And then I'm going to turn it over to our head honcho, moderator, master of ceremonies, Jesse. Jesse's with Young Invincibles. And Jesse, I'm sure you want to introduce the team and kind of dive into what we're going to be talking about.
Well, thank you, Jamae. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining us. Welcome. As Jamae said, I'm Jesse Barba, and I have the privilege of serving as Senior Director of External Affairs at Young Invincibles. We are a national nonprofit where our mission is similar to AYA's in amplifying the voices of young adults in the political process and expanding economic opportunity for all. And so I am so excited to be here at the Close It Summit, focused on their 9th ideation hub, which has the goal of including youth, young adult voices into this summit. And so tonight we are going to hear from a national and state perspectives on how young people are weathering the economic crisis, the solutions they want, and how our organizations, AYA and Young Invincibles, are working to make those a reality. And so we're going to follow this panel conversation with a town hall from 7 to 8 p.m. And we're going to bring some of our audience members up to share their lived experiences with us and reflect on the conversation that we're going to hear. So let's get into it. So I have the pleasure of being joined by my colleague, Malcolm Sullivan, who serves as the organizing manager for YI Texas, and to my partner, my peer, my Allie Bernstein-Talcott, who is, as you heard, a lobbyist for the Association for Young Americans. So what have we seen? Over the last year, young adults have been tossed yet again into the deepest pits of a recession. And with it, they've been straddled with mountains of debt and a cloudy path forward. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic threw higher education into an unprecedented time of upheaval. Campuses nationwide closed down in-person instruction and converted all of their lectures to online course delivery. What happened? The disruption put on stark display the real inequities that have persisted for decades across all types of higher education institutions. Students who relied on campus housing for shelter and meal plans were cut off from these essential things. Costs of travel burdened these students and many others, and students in underserved communities, urban and rural alike, struggle to keep up with coursework on the wrong side of the digital divide. But we know what needs to happen in order to ensure young people have the ability to prosper and thrive. We have to remove those anchors of debt. We have to increase disposable income. We have to reorient academic degree programs and enhance student support services. So our conversation tonight should push your thinking about the future of higher education and economic opportunity, while also recognizing that the status quo before COVID was not working for the 43 million Americans shouldering $1.5 trillion in student debt. So just as the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected communities of color, the student debt crisis and the toll on our economy has also hit people of color especially hard. So it's a lot, I know, but we have two experts that are going to be unraveling all of that for us. But before we dive in, I want to just make sure you keep an eye out and send your responses to a few poll questions on your screen. And in fact, Tiffany, if we can go ahead and launch our first question, let's just get a sense of who is in the room. So with that, I want to level set with both of you, Ali and Malcolm. Your organizations are doing such great work and align so closely with their mission. Can you just set the stage for us about how you work with young adults, what you're hearing from them, and how you engage with them? Malcolm, let's start with you.
Yeah, so as you already mentioned, we are really committed at YI, or Young Invincibles, to really empowering young adults to bring their voices on the political issues that really matter to them. And so we've been involved in talking about student debt for a long time, particularly in our Texas office. But we had the opportunity to really dive in on student debt and write a report called Student Debt in Texas, Why It's Time to Collect on the Best Interests of Texas Borrowers. And so to do that, we really activated young adults in a number of ways. We have a leadership program that we run every year. And so we really got to collaborate with those amazing young adults to hear what they thought about student debt, to hear how it affects them day to day. And then we also realized that, a lot of the data that we see, it speaks to numbers, but it doesn't necessarily speak to experiences. And what we were hearing from young adults was, they had these really potent experiences. And so we wanted to hear from other young adults. So we listened across the state of Texas. We went on a listening tour. And then we surveyed about 1,600 young adults throughout the state of Texas on their experiences with student debt. And what we learned is, maybe not surprising, student debt is a crisis. It's really, really important to young adults in Texas. We know that people are struggling. We know that people are putting their lives on hold. We know that people are sinking underneath this debt. And that really, one of the things that's most surprising, I think, that we learned from all of this and just from our programming, is that young adults feel so powerless and so trapped by the system of debt. In Texas in particular, the Texas legislature decided to deregulate tuition in 2003. And since 2003, we've seen tuition go up and up and up and up for these public institutions. So this education that we said was a public good, we're now saddling young people with, and they're paying for, they're going tens of thousands of dollars into debt for, and they weren't even alive, some of them, when this decision was made. I mean, it's absurd. And so I really think that what we've learned is that, the young people are leading the way on this. They've been telling us this. And speaking as a young person myself, we've been saying this for so long. And it's really time to start listening to those voices and to start really thinking about what the solutions are, not to keep relitigating, but to really start, okay, there are things that we can do in Texas. There are things that I know AYA is doing nationally, and it's time to really, get ready to do it. It's really time.
Malcolm, you bring up such a great point in terms of all of these challenges that we're facing. They're not new, right? They're inextricably tied to what we went through a decade ago during the Great Recession, right? And I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of the struggle to regain states' investment in public institutions of higher education, which has just continued to erode and decline. But Ali, I want to give you some time here. You know, same question. How is AYA kind of meeting young people and young adults where they are to kind of learn from them and then be better advocates on their behalf?
Absolutely. Well, it's a great question. And I just want to like plus 1 million to everything Malcolm said. We are very aligned with YI on, the pressing need to tackle the student debt issue. And it was actually why I was hired in 2016 to be a voice for AYA's member as a brand new organization. The whole mission of the Association of Young Americans is to bring lobbying as a tool to our members and to advocates. And what I often tell our members is that you don't need to be a hired lobbyist to lobby for yourself. And you don't need to be a policy wonk and an expert on, all the things that you see in the news that you're like, I have no idea what they're talking about. Marching in the streets is advocacy. Tweeting from your phones is advocacy. And so what I like, and right, lobbyist is a dirty word if you're outside Capitol Hill, and there's a bad connotation with it. It's like, oh, the lobbyists have ruined the world. And it's like, well, actually, we're trying to, at AYA, reclaim that word and rebrand it so that all young people can be the best advocates and lobbyists for themselves. And how are we doing that? We're doing it by utilizing the tools that we all have as young people at our disposal. And so that is connecting with our members across all the channels, right? So whether that's Facebook or Twitter, or right now, not in person, and Instagram, and all of the creative ways that we as society have come together on social media. And so we've formed things like member advisory groups, task forces. We've done countless surveys similar to, YI, on like really wanting to hear our members' voices. What are they struggling with? What keeps them up at night? And then using that information and, those issues that really are affecting their family planning, their economic status, their ability to participate in the economy. And so I think that, what we're seeing in the news are the things that are rising to public awareness levels. And for the first time in, a long time, we have an administration that is talking about student debt. It was in the debates for the first time in decades, right? Like, our advocacy as young people is finally making it to the government and getting their attention. And look, members of Congress check their tweets. So we are going to utilize the platforms that make a difference with those policymakers, and we're going to speak their language too. And so what I often like to say about what I do as a lobbyist is I'm a liaison between the sausage making on Capitol Hill and like what happens there and all the wonky things, and then serving as a liaison and a translator back down to our members to give them what is happening in layman's terms. And so I think the other big thing is forming coalitions and collaborating with organizations like yours, that we're all in this together. We're fighting this uphill battle together. And the more tools at our disposal to make sure that young people not only march in the streets and take the actions and lobby for themselves, but like run for office so that we can have some young people who finally represent us. And we're seeing that, right? The trend is happening, right? More young people have been elected into office more than ever in the last couple of years. And there is truly a trend to recognize that, we can't have a Congress that is completely out of touch aside from like their grandkids, right? Like they need to kind of hear from us in all ways. And whether that's old school writing an op-ed, we'll write an op-ed. And so, like I said, we're just we're directly connecting with our members and giving them the tools to be their own lobbyists.
I love that. That's such a great answer. And, you know, as a former lobbyist myself, I like to often say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And so that's kind of what you're doing. You're giving the voice to young adults, right? You are being in the room where it happens, making the decisions, and really elevating their voices in those circles. I want to draw us back quickly to the focus of kind of higher education, right? I think Ali, you just hit it on the head in terms of how canceling student debt and these cries have just kept growing louder and louder throughout the election in 2020. Malcolm, I want to start with you. You know, talk to us for a moment about how student debt specifically is putting the lives of young adults in Texas on pause. I know you alluded to some of the things that you found out in your report, but maybe what are like the moral implications of canceling student debt? How are we framing the issue as one of equity concerns?
I think that's a great question. I know that you said just talk to us for a moment, and like goodness knows I could be here for an hour and a half talking about all the,
Well,
you
it's a
know,
good thing that we have a town hall after this, so we'll see you there.
yeah. So I'll see you all there. But I don't need to be the only one talking on it because I know everybody who has been touched by student debt has, you know, their own story to tell about this. But it's really, I mean, to Ali's point, I think a lot of what we've kind of been hearing up till very recently is the idea that student debt is good and it allows people to get all these new experiences that they wouldn't have otherwise. And what we really saw was counter to that. We saw that it was really putting people's plans on hold. People are delaying having families, buying homes, buying cars, getting new jobs. We're really seeing that people are building their whole lives around this debt that they're saddled with, that they expect to have maybe till, you know, they're 65. Like there are people who just don't know when they will ever be free of debt. And I think something that we found that was really, really troubling was that 65% of people who had student debt felt like they were prevented from getting what they wanted in life by that debt. So really, like, you know, this investment that they've made that's supposed to open up the world to them is in fact shutting them out of it. And so that's really desperately troubling. But I think what's even more heartbreaking that we found is that 50% of people with student debt said that paying off their loans prevented them from being able to save for an emergency. And if we've learned nothing else from the past year, it's that having that cushion, having that safety net is so, so essential. Like it is literally the difference between being housed and being unhoused for people. And so, you know, knowing that we are putting people in this position where they have to choose between feeding their families and, you know, paying off their student loans, you know, there's a really big problem there. And then especially, as you said, it is a matter of equity. It's a matter of justice. We see that women are way more stressed out about their loans, for instance, than men and then non-women. We're seeing that Latinx borrowers are reporting so much more stress and more anguish about their loans than about their white counterparts are. And we also know that in Texas, the share of loans is not equal. We know that, for instance, Black borrowers are much more likely to need to take out loans. And when they do take out those loans, they're more likely to be larger loans. So, you know, when we're saying that 50% of people with student debt felt like they couldn't save for an emergency, we're not looking at like, you know, an equitable cut across the state of Texas. We're looking at a very racialized, very gendered group. And really who that affects is going to be people of color. It's going to be women. It's going to be first generation college attendees. And we're really setting people up to fail in a way that is so, so troubling and needs an immediate solution.
Yeah, I mean, Malcolm, you again spoke the words that I was thinking about what today's student actually looks like, right? I think universities from their origins were primarily serve the wealthy and powerful, but today that's not true, right? Today, I think more than 40% of students are of color, right? 2/3 hold a job while they're in class. I think 30% are 25 and older, right? They're not just always young. And moreover, 1 in 4 college students also is a parent, or as a guardian, right? So they're doing double shifts every single night. But I think, to your point in why canceling student debt is so important, right? We are in a public pandemic where public health should be your first priority. And I think, Allie, this comes back to the question I want to pose to you, right? Some assistance did come, right? We had the CARES Act that became law, and in some of the provisions, it provided student emergency grant funding, as well as some interest-free pause on federally held student loan repayment. But I think clearly what is needed now for this moment is canceling student debt. But is the message that Malcolm is hearing in Texas making its way to Capitol Hill? I think you follow the news as closely as I do. Joe Biden last week has supported $10,000 of student debt reduction on the campaign trail. And yet he asked Congress to do the hard part of canceling debt. Can you just talk to us for a moment about what the politics are around this issue federally, and how likely are we to see something, and who the hell is leading the charge anyway?
Yes. And this is, probably the question I get asked the most is like, tell us what's going to happen. It's the crystal ball question. And it's hard. It's really a difficult question to answer. And for those of you who pay attention to the news and you feel like you have whiplash because it's like one day somebody's saying this and then the next day a deal is cut and this is happening. And you know what? It causes real advocacy fatigue for the public. But as somebody who is in it every single day, these things take time and massive change. Like I said, it was progress to even hear the words student debt cancellation and debt relief in town halls across the country, in national debates, and in executive orders, and and relief, right? Like, because we haven't had an executive order yet to cancel debt. And so I think what we need to think about is that it is on the agenda, right, from the Biden administration, and it has been on the Democratic agenda for quite some time. And so I think with this new dynamic, right, people did not expect. I think I might have been one of the only few lobbyists who thought, maybe it's because I'm not jaded yet, that Georgia was going to happen the whole time. And I had faith that, that Georgia could happen and really change the scenario. And so now all the scenario planning that we were doing, thinking that the dynamic in the Senate would be different, is now a reality for student debt cancellation. And I think that the pressure now is greater to do more because there's a friendlier administration to that issue. And so I think, how do we tackle these issues in this new dynamic, right? And so while there's a lot of talk about unity, and Democrats are in the majority, there's not unity yet, right? Like, we are so far from unity. And I don't just mean unity with like Republicans and Democrats singing Kumbaya and we're going to fix everything overnight. I mean, like, there's not even unity on how we tackle student debt amongst the parties themselves, right? Like, there are progressive Democrats that think that like this needs to happen overnight in full, and then there are more moderate Democrats who are like, we've got to do this piecemeal. And then you have the Biden administration, who was in the press talking about possibly canceling $50,000 of debt, and then people felt very scorned that it then went to $10,000, and then right now it's like, oh, but now he's putting it on Congress. And so I think that there are a couple of different ways that this could happen and how this could unfold, right? And from our perspective, AYA looks at these issues from two completely different angles, right? There's access, affordability, and accountability, which is like a comprehensive rewrite of the Higher Education Act to make sure that if student debt cancellation happens, we're not just having a whole new set of borrowers that are under the same law, that in 20 years, they're going to be in the same exact position as we were. So that's like on the back end, right, of like the policy that needs to change to prevent this from continuing to happen. And then there's the borrower side, the people who have already been affected and who are dealing with this every day. And that's the relief side. And that's the student debt cancellation. And I think that, there have been lots of priorities in both chambers that we've seen. So for instance, on the House side, the Education and Labor Committee in the past couple of Congresses has made their priorities for addressing these issues through their College Affordability Act, which would have lowered the cost of college for students and their families, which would have improved the quality of education by holding institutions accountable. And then they would have expanded opportunities for students. And so I think that we see these policies and we see how this is going to happen. But then, we have the Senate, which was under Republican leadership for a while, and they, under the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which is responsible for doing higher education, there was some bipartisan talks about what needed to be done comprehensively, but the public never actually saw a comprehensive plan. And so I think that under that plan, we're going to now see with Senator Patty Murray at the helm what could happen here in terms of what does the Senate think needs to be done. And so you have a lot of competing interests. And so the crystal ball question is, does this happen? I think yes, but we as the community need to understand that this doesn't happen overnight, and the small steps are where we're going to really be able to build on wins. And so, for instance, if it comes in, if it's $10,000 of relief that happens through an executive order, and then President Biden says, okay, we did a small chunk of relief that affects the most impacted borrowers and has an immediate impact on at least leveling the playing field a little bit, then our community should build on that win and say, okay, we did this part, but we've still got this. We're not trying to move the goalpost. The goalpost is the same, but it's how can we move it while still not losing sight of the bigger ask, which is like, we can't have a system in which we continue to put more students in the same position that we are now because we haven't fixed the back end. And so I think it could happen. It's just going to be incremental, and that's why the everyday advocacy and keeping these things at the forefront of members of Congress's mind, and also thanking them when they do good things and holding them accountable, but also realizing the perspective, right? Biden can't come in and say, we're doing this overnight, because there's then 4 years of policy making that might not get done in other very impactful areas.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say, Allie, is grab your phones if you're out there, tweet at your members of Congress, sign on to petitions that AYA and YI send out to their member listservs, get engaged, make sure that you're elevating your story and your lived experiences through Allie, through YI, making sure that lawmakers and legislators hear you. Because even if student debt cancellation gets done tomorrow night, the fight for equity and making sure that the actual root causes of student debt crisis are actually addressed later down the line. But I do want to make reference to an awesome poll that I thought AYA did with AARP that actually looked at, and it complements what you were saying, Malcolm, about 40% of student loan borrowers said that the debt has prevented or delayed them from saving for retirement. And I think that's so big, because millennials, for instance, are the most indebted generation in history, who has negative net wealth compared to their peers. And I think what you mentioned, Allie, in terms of the 10,000 model versus $50,000 model of student debt relief, what I have seen is if we cancel $50,000 worth of student debt relief, that is going to impact 75% of all households with borrowers. And that's great. That's wonderful. But even if we get the $10,000 in student debt relief, that's going to be helping 30% of all student borrower households. So I think that there are trade-offs for both. And I think we want to just be cognizant of all of those things that are at our disposal. I think, Malcolm, we talked earlier about, all these intersectionalities of policy that are facing young people. They're all linked, right? The inability to pursue continued higher ed diminishes your lifetime earning potentials and lowers your access to affordable healthcare. And I think you can probably draw a straight line of education leading to better, more stable jobs that pay higher wages, and then in turn allow families to accumulate wealth that can be used to improve their health. And so what we are seeing now is an economy that is still super slow to rebound. This V-shaped recovery that we keep hearing about, it doesn't really exist. You know, youth unemployment today still stands at a staggering 11%. It's even higher for communities of color. And so I wonder if maybe you can talk to us a bit about what sorts of things young people are demanding in Texas to ensure that an economy will eventually work for them. Do they trust that there is this intersectionality of getting a higher education degree to lead to better outcomes?
I mean, I think there is still a lot of people who do think that. And I think that one of the things that we need to do is to support the young adults who are pursuing college because that is what they think, and to make sure that that is something that is then possible for them. So, you know, what we talked about earlier about like who's actually in school right now. It's people who are working, it's people who are parents, it's people who are grandparents. It's, you know, it's not, you know, the idea of somebody who's like just right out of high school and doing full-time classes and nothing else. That's not necessarily the majority of people who are going to school in Texas. So we need to make sure that we're supporting student parents, that we have appropriate safety nets in place for young people in college in terms of mental health, in terms of making sure that they have access to the bare necessities of what you need to be able to succeed in college. So, you know, you shouldn't have to be worrying about, hey, do I buy food or do I pay my internet bill? Because I can't go to school without my internet bill paid, but I also can't go to school if I can't eat. You know, these are not questions that young people or anybody should ever be asking themselves. It's not right. But then I think we also need to really think about what other structures are there in Texas that could kind of be activated to take some of that pressure off young adults, to really like, okay, my only thing that I can do to better myself or, you know, get a good job is to go to college. And I think it was Kelly pointed out in the chat recently that, you know, it's not just college degrees that get you good jobs, that get you jobs that pay you well. And so I think we have a pretty robust series of apprenticeships in the state of Texas, which is great. But, you know, I think what we would love to see is even more apprenticeships, even more, you know, dual credit programs, and to make them more appealing for women and people of color, because the way that they're distributed is not always equitable. And then finally, the biggest thing that I think that Texas could do to support our economy and to support young adults and also everybody is really to expand Medicaid. We have so many uninsured people. And the idea that, you know, you would have to rely on just having a very high paying job to be able to afford your own health insurance is really troubling. There's just not a good option for most people who are not in deep poverty to be able to afford health insurance. And, you know, we're seeing right now, especially that if you lose your job and you're not, you know, making $0 a year, you know, there's just no way for you to get health insurance. And that really affects young people. There are so many young people who are not able to get insured. And that really has so many troubling implications for, you know, not just the economy, but also like the morality of our systems. But really that's something that we could fix very easily today and like make money in the state. So it feels like a real no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to stick with affordable healthcare for a quick second because President Biden did just sign an executive order today. So if you don't have health insurance, there's a special enrollment period that is open through May. So make sure you get covered. So that's my little public health shout out there. But I want to stay here for a moment longer and just pivot over to Allie, because I read a really interesting new report from New America that suggested 80% of students are concerned about getting any type of job upon graduation. And I think, Malcolm, you highlighted this so beautifully, including 86% of Latinx students and 90% of caregivers. In fact, I think a vast majority of students believe that the federal government should prioritize making higher ed affordable and ensuring that it provides a good value to students, right? It makes sense. What is my return on investment for ponying up tens of thousands of dollars? So, Allie, you can't really talk about the economy and higher education as two separate things anymore, right? They are so intertwined. And so maybe you can highlight for us, the need to start reimagining higher education as a preparation tool for the workforce. How might lawmakers and institutions better prepare young adults in their transition to their first job even?
That is a great question. And I love the plug because I was going to make it if you didn't. And I also love New America. If you guys, want really great resources on a lot of the policy talk that we talk about, they have just some phenomenal research. So, I think clearly a quality education is necessary to enter today's workforce. I mean, that's what we talk about. I represent, people in the K-12 space as well. And it's like, that is the whole goal of our education system, is to provide a quality education in hopes that we create citizens that can participate in the economy, that can be fulfilled in their lives, that don't have to put off things like family planning and self-happiness, and that don't have to worry about where their next meal comes from or where they're going to sleep, right? That the whole point of educating our citizens is something that, like, Jefferson, right? Thomas Jefferson understood the importance of providing, a quality education. But I think what we need to rethink is, like, what are the pathways to higher education, right? And, people are living longer, and education comes at us in so many forms. Like, think about podcasts and all these, like, amazing opportunities for educating ourselves in various ways. And I think that, one, we need to start thinking about the multiple ways that our system already offers a young American to get a quality education. And I think kind of breaking down this notion that it has to be a 4-year institution, right? The 4-year institutions are great opportunities for millions of students, but they're also causing us to go into a $1.7 trillion deficit and debt, because 45 million Americans have bought into this and are not getting what they see. And so there is this real fear of, students graduating high school that are like, I'm seeing what's happening. And so how can I justify this 4-year gig if it literally is causing the future the generations above me to go into literally insurmountable debt that is crushing their life? And so I think step one is we need to utilize the tools that are already existing. We need to think about breaking down the narrative that the 4-year institution thing is not for everybody and doesn't need to be, but that if it is what that individual would like to do, they should have an equal opportunity to do it, right? Because the labor market has not yet changed to not require on resumes that, we need a 4-year degree, right? And so there is that labor market pressure for people to have that degree. And so again, I think that's an access and equity piece. And I think that helping the labor market adjust is, again, helping lawmakers understand the need of the changing demographics of today's traditional students. I think Malcolm and Jesse, you guys covered it earlier, right? We are seeing that the traditional student is no longer an 18-year-old, like, fresh-faced, like, person, right? These are people who are either already been in the workforce and took gap years because they knew they couldn't afford to go to a 4-year degree right off the bat. These are students who were in dual enrollment programs and so took classes in their high school time to lessen the cost of going to a 4-year university. I think we need to end the stigma of what 2-year community colleges do, right? Like those are amazing segues into other higher education opportunities. Of course, they need to be high quality and held to high standards, right? But it's not a one size fits all in the sense that like 4-year is for everybody and should be for everybody. And so I think that we need to understand that there are programs right now at the federal level that AYA is advocating for, like more money for dual enrollment programs, more money for work study, career and technical education, right? Like there are some amazing career and technical education. And for those of you who don't know, that's actually the new lingo, the new name for what used to be called vocational education. But again, that had a stigma for some reason. What is with the stigma of a respected person who comes and fixes my electricity or our plumbing or my vet tech who saves my animals' lives? These are respected professions, and we need as Americans to come together to recognize that not everybody is going to be a professor or a researcher, right? Like these jobs are respectable and they know so much more, and they're making more money than I am as a lawyer, right? Like I went to law school, and electricians going to esteemed career and technical education programs are coming out and having thriving businesses. So this is just, this is a cultural shift, right? That we need to make, that respects work. And it's about telling our society that we no longer want the workforce to make these unrealistic demands, that the labor market is requiring a piece of paper that says everybody must get this when it's not working. And also, it's not giving the students who are graduating from these schools the actual skills needed, right? Like I wished I had taken a gap year and actually went into the workforce, because I would have appreciated the furthering education after having some actual reality around me, right? Like what you learn in school as a college, student and even in law school does not compare to what you learn when you are literally on the job. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do in shaping how the labor market views the need for, recognizing today's students. The education system needs to, really understand who they're serving. And again, today's traditional student is actually not the 18-year-olds who are going into their freshman year and really excited for all the things that are, well, not this year, right? But the college looks very different right now. But I think, we have a job to do here. And I think it's part of breaking down some of these stigmas about, what a quality workforce is that helps the economy.
Yeah. I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head all over the place. And I think you both have said such great things, right? I think we as a nation really have to look in the mirror, really address the longstanding barriers that have impeded entry into quality employment and job training programs, as you mentioned, Ali, for millions of young people. And I think it really focuses and narrows down into some of the discriminatory practices against people of color, undocumented folks, or even folks in the legal system. We know today that those 600 plus DACA recipients and the hundreds of thousands of young adults in prison, they have the skills that employers need. And because of over policing or the way that we view a quality job, right, they are disproportionately left out, and those doors are closed behind them pretty quickly. And so, I think we have identified tonight, a series of problems facing young people. We know the policies that we need to champion, but how do we get people empowered to listen, right? And I think I want to come back to you, Malcolm, because you're on the ground. You're really at the grassroots level, not only with an ear to what young people want day in and day out in your day-to-day job as an organizing manager, but you really have the ear of a state in which it's shifting, I think. And so I really want to get ideas from you in terms of what priorities YI Texas has this legislative session, And how are you communicating them with state lawmakers who might be on the other side of the aisle? How are you building that youth power that can then transform the legislature into a vision that you guys see?
Oh man, I wish you hadn't asked that last, because oof, if we're gonna finish up, no, just kidding. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think some of our really big priorities for this legislative session are the things that we think are going to be most likely. Texas, as a state, is pretty reluctant to spend money. We don't really want to dip into the rainy day fund, which can really be unfortunate. But I think that gives, weirdly, us a really big opportunity in Texas, because the work is not going to be done this year. So what we want to do is to do the work that can continue to build, and that we can work with again and kind of like refresh and like, okay, we knocked that one out, like where do we go next? And so it's really about kind of that ramping up process. So one of the things that we're really excited about is a student borrower bill of rights, kind of like they have in other states. And that's something that is budget neutral. We don't have to spend too much money on that, but would really provide some kind of infrastructure in the state to protect borrowers, because right now it's really easy for student borrowers of all ages to be taken advantage of. I mean, there's a pretty standard practice where, somebody goes to take out loans, maybe they're 18, maybe they're 25, they go to take out that, $50,000 loan to go to college. They have to read a bunch of paperwork about how it's going to go. And then 4.5 years later, they get their first bill and they've not been refreshed on like, hey, here's how the repayment process goes. We know that students in Texas and young people in Texas don't know very much about the repayment process. It's very opaque, and there's not a lot of good information out there for them. So that's definitely something that we try to correct at YI. We really want to educate young people and give them the tools to educate each other, and to educate their communities. But we see that that's a really troubling lack of knowledge that is being like, it's predatory. It's not accidental. It's that, these student loan servicers can get away with it. And, a student borrower bill of rights would require student loan servicers to provide that education, and to provide information about, maybe the standard repayment process is not right for every person. So to provide information about other forms of repayment. So that's something that we're really excited to be working on this session. And we're really excited to bring young people's voices to the ledge, in service of that. And so, in like kind of what you were both saying, Ali and Jesse, student and young people's voices are so important. Whether we're talking to people who, we think are going to agree with us or we think might not. I mean, a personal story is so key. I mean, it is really certain people are maybe out of touch, and not always because they're being malicious or anything like that, but because they don't have that real insight into what's going on the ground. And so being able to work with young people, mobilize young people, get them to tell their stories about how they have been saddled with student debt, about how they don't know when they'll be able to afford a house, buy a car, start a family. These are things that really hit home. I think maybe particularly in Texas, where we value that kind of like rough independence. That's stuff that's really meaningful for legislators. And I also think the other part of what we're excited to do in terms of building youth power is, work with our coalitions and bring student voices and student borrowers' voices to our coalitions, particularly PACE, our higher education and equity coalition, and to really make sure that that's embedded in the work, so that, again, it doesn't just stay this year when the Texas legislature is in session, but that's something that we can really build into our work going forward. And so that we can, build up the voices and the power of these young leaders, so that, even if in 25 years they're not eligible to be part of YI anymore because they've aged out of who we are talking about primarily, they still have these skills and they still have this knowledge, and they still know how to do what Allie does and recommends, to just like call the people who work for them to really make it clear, like, hey, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is how I'm going to get it, you work for me. And to really make sure that that's something that we're leaving young people with, because these issues only go away when we all work together to make them go away. And so I'm really excited for this legislative session, and I'm really excited for 2021 and beyond. I think it's really promising.
It's beautiful. I hear such optimism in your voice and your tone. And I love what you said about personal stories, because facts and figures and data points, they're unforgettable. But stories are really what carry the day. I think that's what YI endeavors to do every single day with our Young Advocates programs all across the nation, going deep with 20 to 25 young adults, understanding their lived experiences, and then really being able to translate into a really graphic understanding for lawmakers and the media, quite frankly, and really turn the optics and the word choice from just trying to survive to actually how we create these thriving communities. And so I love what you're doing, Malcolm. I want to stay here for one more second with you, and then flip it over to Allie before we come to a close at the 7 o'clock hour here. But I want to see, Malcolm, if there are any particular activities or events that you are going to be leading in the next couple of weeks or months, or specific legislation or advocacy tools that you're hosting where young people can plug in today. What should they be on the lookout for? And then I'm going to ask the same question to you as well, Allie. So Malcolm?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are in the early stages of planning an advocacy day for later in the session. So we're really excited about that. I can't tell you too much actual concrete information about it yet, but stay tuned. It's so exciting. And then, in the meantime, if, the things that Allie and I and Jesse are talking about seem really intriguing, something that I was really fortunate to get to work on with this report that we just published was a toolkit that is affixed to the report that is really for young people and demystifies advocacy. So if you want to talk about student debt with, again, the people who work for you, with legislators who work for you, these give you the tools to be able to do that. And also are transferable skills. So you can, I won't tell if you use it for other things, that's also perfect. So we're really excited to have that launched and to have that be a tool that young people can learn from and can share within their communities. And so, we can even be practicing before we have the notices about like, hey, this bill is going to be read on this day. Like, who wants to come and testify with us? Or, like, here's our advocacy day. That's a really good thing to do right now if you're just raring to go.
That's awesome. Allie, I'm going to flip it over to you.
Yeah. So again, plus 1 million to everything Malcolm is saying. And, again, you all don't need to be lobbyists in the sense that you need to know how the reconciliation process works or how bills move through committee, right? Like, I mean, maybe that's like, I don't know, right? Maybe you guys do know that, but you don't, when you are advocating to a member, whether it's a traditional, if things go back to normal and you all end up on Capitol Hill with our organizations for advocacy days, I just want to remind everybody that what we're doing is giving you all the tools to actually share your stories. Like, the policy making and all the difficult stuff, like that is our job to do for you and to help your stories make it to the ears of those members. Because as Jesse said, it's the stories that change the minds. The facts and figures just support the need while we're talking all of our wonky stuff that nobody ever really understands, right? And so I think that keeping that in mind and that and remembering that that's the lobbying and the advocacy is your opportunity to tell those stories. And I think From AYA's perspective, we're going to be doing a lot of campaigns on the various issue topics. We are getting ready to do direct Hill meetings. Those are obviously virtual these days, and I do them from my pajamas. So, so that's how lobbying has changed in this new era. I text staffers, right? Like they're people too, right? And the other thing to keep in mind is that when we're meeting with Capitol Hill offices, we're meeting with people our age. One of the things that I often do in our trainings is we get like a lot of people who are like, what? I'm meeting with like a 22-year-old? And like, I thought I was meeting with a member themselves. And it's like, well, actually, it's those 22-year-olds and those 30-year-olds who, one, are more relatable to us. And so they hear us. And they're also the ones who are actually writing the legislation. And so the more we make the case to those staff members and those people who are doing the work on the ground, the more they can then go adequately share our story to their bosses, who then give them the okay. And that's how like minds change, right? And so I think from AYA's perspective, again, just bringing it back to the fact that like we are giving our members the direct advocacy tools, and it's so easy, right? Again, we can lobby from home, we can lobby in our pajamas, we can use things like phone to action to send a mass text. And I think that the other piece is that Instagram has been, just blowing up in terms of the educational content about civics and how our government works. And so the more that you all can spread those facts, right? Like hashtag facts, about like the need for those things, the more good we're doing. And that is advocacy, right? Advocacy doesn't need to just be direct lobbying to the members. It's getting more people to be comfortable talking about the issues that we are all so passionate about, and widening the circle of support. And so that's something that AYA is really working on. Again, we're a relatively newer organization, but just in a few years, we've grown tremendously. And I think that advocacy is changing with technology, and we're embracing it. And so again, I think the more. So the other thing that I think people think doesn't matter are the endless letters that you see in the petitions. They actually do matter. So when a staff member who works on education gets 7,000 letters to their inbox, they have to tell their boss about that, right? Otherwise, that's going to be in the media, and people are going to say like, oh, like then there's going to be an op-ed that's like, our constituents wrote over 7,000 letters and we didn't even get a single response or acknowledgement that this isn't a crisis. This issue is a crisis in our town. Like for instance, for like things like public service loan forgiveness, when firefighters and teachers were like, what? We were scared that we were gonna lose the possibility of public service loan forgiveness because we're 9 years into it and it's such a mess. And so I think like, but then they wrote op-eds and they did the things that matter in terms of the way that a member of Congress actually sees it. And so those things that people get really fatigued, and often, like I say as a lobbyist, rat on the wheel syndrome, they work. And so I would say continue those things, even though they're sometimes exhausting, but they're also a click of a button on our phone. So I just encourage us to keep it up, because we are making a difference. Like we saw it on national television. So and we will hold them accountable. Trust us.
Yeah, I love that, because they're all different tactics and they're all used for different ends and means. Even in the regulatory rulemaking process, if you submit a comment, those agencies are required by law to read it before the rule becomes final. And so if you don't agree with it, you can have you and your 5,000 best friends or 500 best friends, or even just 5 best friends, write letters on the proposed rule, and it takes time. That's a delay tactic. And the same is true if you want to elevate your issue before Congress. But before I close, I want to give Ali a 10 out of 10 on Room Rater. Fantastic Ruth Bader Ginsburg behind you. I love that. But I want to just close here what has been an incredibly fast hour. On behalf of all of us at Young Invincibles and the Association for Young Americans, by thanking our two speakers, Ali and Malcolm, for their time and expertise. But I also want to thank you all who took the time to join us for this virtual session. And now, don't leave, because we're going to transition to our second hour, Town Hall with Young Adults. So we're going to be joined by Lisa Giordano from the Association of Young Americans for a reflection on kind of what we just heard, and hopefully bring some of the audience up on stage to have a conversation about either their lived experiences or how they're advocating in their communities. So appreciate the time now, and let's make that switch here.
Yeah, it's great to hear from both of you, Malcolm and Ali. That was a great discussion, and was in agreement with everything that was said. I thought it was really cool to hear the difference in state level versus federal level policy. Malcolm, your experience in Texas and what Texas constituents are experiencing, and Ali, how it is to be lobbying with our reps and senators. I thought a really interesting point at the end of the discussion was personal stories and hearing from actual borrowers and young people that have direct experience with these issues. And I'm wondering for our attendees, if anyone wants to share some of their own experiences or issues that they face in the day-to-day that they're looking to find policy solutions to or to advocate themselves.
Yeah, I'm just gonna double down there, Ali. I mean, I heard some incredible statistics, right? And what I just learned and walked away from here is, to have an affordable, accessible, and equitable higher education system, we've got to direct public investment to these institutions, hands down. But we also have to couple that investment with accountability measures, making sure that there are improved outcomes that empower graduates to actually get jobs in our communities. And we know that the weight of student debt that has impacted, I think Ali mentioned 1.7 trillion, 43 million student borrowers with $1.7 trillion worth of student debt, right? That weight is heaviest on our Black and Latinx borrowers. And so just as bad policy choices from the Great Recession have kind of exacerbated the financial crisis, we need to shift our mindset, and lawmakers and advocates and young people really have to focus in on the equity-focused approach to, I guess, fixing and correcting our higher education system today so we don't repeat past failures.
Yeah, acknowledging that these issues don't affect all equally and that some populations are disproportionately impacted is super important.
So I'm looking at some of these polls here. Very interesting outlook here. The biggest concern about the future of work is the growing economic and income inequality. And I think that's exactly kind of what Malcolm was hitting on earlier, about putting your life on pause because of what student debt is doing to you. And then the heaviest weight of those burdens falling on our brothers and sisters in the Latinx and African-American communities. So that falls in line exactly with the report that you just issued.
Yeah, absolutely. Also seeing below that what skills young people most need to succeed in the future, leadership and management. I think that, as we were speaking about before, higher education is really important in giving us the tools we need to find the jobs that we want, but also these skills are able to be developed without higher ed. So we need to be investing in and focusing on other opportunities for young people to gain these skills without the four-year degree or the paper. And specifically leadership and management can happen through various workforce development programs.
So I'm pretty interested to know kind of where our audience lands on what this new Biden administration can do in the next 100 days. So I would love our audience to just throw in the chat one action you want this administration to take on higher education. I'm very curious. We talked a lot in this panel about student debt, but there's certainly so many more actions, whether they're equity focused or they're accessibility focused or they're affordability focused or even just support and wraparound services focused. What are some of the things that folks on this call are interested in the Biden administration leaning in on? Maybe I'll ask that same question to you, Lisa. What is one of the first actions that a Biden administration can do in your eyes to support young Americans? And that could be student debt.
Yeah, well, I think this past week we've seen a lot of executive actions that actually touch on a lot of our priorities as young people, whether it is climate, also like eliminating private prisons, and a lot of like racial equity initiatives that Biden has taken on in his first week. Ideally, student debt cancellation would be the next executive action that he takes on that would most immediately and effectively benefit young people. So we continue to advocate for that. But as we discussed during the panel, we are also in favor of smaller pieces of legislation and change from like employer participation and repayment to college affordability. We are heavily advocating for Biden to use his executive power as he's been widely exercising for cancellation. But we also continue to advocate for Congress and the new administration at large to pass policies that contribute in any way to relieving the debt burden for young people. So I would say that's our first priority, but we are definitely happy to see all of the action that's been taken on climate and racial equity and other issues as well.
Yeah, I think, if I could lean in to an issue outside of student loan forgiveness, I think I would really look to see this administration take on kind of a federal state partnership. It's something I was talking to and alluding to earlier about state divestment that we saw after the Great Recession. And I would love for Biden to work with Congress to eliminate undergrad tuition at public colleges and universities. I think that that's a huge opportunity there. But first and foremost, he could direct the Secretary of Education to award meaty grants to states that can establish these federal state partnerships whereby the state would get a dollar for dollar match from the federal government for however much funding they appropriate for state schools. And I think, there are certain provisions that we saw in the CARES Act and the HEROES Act that didn't pass, but having a maintenance of effort requirement on the behalf of states so that states have at least some skin in the game. They can't just keep walking away from the table, leaving students out to dry. So I think that's certainly one thing I'm looking for this administration to do. I don't think it's going to happen in the first 10 days through his blitzkrieg of executive orders, but it's something I really want him to lead into the moment on.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to recognize that Biden is sort of focusing on large sweeping changes at the moment and like a very broad agenda, but it's also crucial that we continue to advocate for these more specific policies, like such as a state-federal partnership or college affordability and other reforms that can help on a smaller scale over time.
Yeah, one of the things that we saw that came out of the Great Recession was, a lot of students put their careers on hold because the market was so bad and decided they were going to go back to school, sharpen up their degrees and skill sets, and come out more ready for a job. But what ended up happening, as you well know, is for-profit universities, took rise. And I think that the experiment of sending taxpayer money to for-profit colleges has been a failure. I think on average, students attending these institutions earn no more than those who didn't attend those colleges at all. And so I think the average for-profit, college certificate or even associate degree program, it costs about 4 times as much as a public college anyway, and you're not getting the same return on investment. And I think this goes back to exactly what Malcolm was saying, that a lot of young adults, they do still believe in the 4-year degree, or even to Allie's comments, the 2-year degree. But we need to make sure that those bad actors, those for-profit actors, are actually getting clamped down and aren't receiving those taxpayer-funded money to, kind of sideline the careers and trajectory of young people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, can you all hear me? There's a good question from Kayla.
Yeah, I noticed that Kayla had asked in the chat what kind of programs are there available that can help pay off student loan debt. One of the programs that we focused on at AYA over past years is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. And it hasn't done so well, obviously, as we know from the last Department of Education. very few borrowers actually received the relief that they were due, but it was one of the first lifelines that we were offered as student borrowers as a form of debt relief. And although smaller programs like that don't provide the sweeping change that we need through cancellation, they are helpful to borrowers. For example, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program allowed people working in the public sector in education or nurses to receive debt relief over time after having worked for a set amount of years. And we can see other programs, we hope to see other programs developed that will create similar opportunities for borrowers. I don't know if Ali, you want to speak to some of the specific programs that AYA is advocating for now?
Yeah, I mean, we are huge proponents of the PSLF program. And honestly, the program is very well intentioned and it is complicated. We haven't had, unfortunately, in the last 4 years, an administration that was dedicated as the first cohort of people who were eligible for forgiveness, willing to take the steps necessary to actually implement a very complex and complicated program. And so it's not that the program itself is not worthy or broken, it's that we needed governmental commitment to implementing a program that Congress created. And in terms of, other programs, right, like the way that I was speaking about this earlier is that there are a lot of programs to make college more affordable on the front end, right? Like Pell Grants and scholarships and direct grants. But then on the relief side, it's not that easy and there aren't that many. And so again, this is where this issue is coming into play, that we have a system that takes care of making it slightly more affordable and easier to take out money, and that's again the importance of understanding what a loan is and what a grant is. But on the back end, there isn't that many things that borrowers can do that will significantly reduce their payments or eliminate their payments. And again, that was a policy thing, right? The government at the time felt like if our borrowers are going to take out money, they should be paying it back, and only in a limited circumstances, like whether you are a public servant for 10 years, will the government say, all right, we'll pay this off for you. And so again, the options are limited, and states and different companies have their own ways of doing that. But again, the federal government has a long way to go here.
Yeah, Kayla, and if you're interested, also I would look into income-driven repayments. Those are plans that set monthly student loan payments based on a couple of things, right? Your income and family size. And so it allows you as a borrower to pay more when your income is higher. I think one of the things that has gotten a little confusing with IDR payments is just that there's so many plans available, which kind of creates barriers to successfully navigating them. And I think, speaking of bipartisanship issues, I think this is an area that is broad and bipartisan in the need to actually simplify and improve the IDR system. And I think we've seen over the past couple of years, multiple policymakers putting forth specific proposals to reform and streamline that. So I would certainly take a look at those tools at your disposal.
Yeah. There are also certain services that can help you, like Buy Savvy is one of them, and SoFi. There are different kind of organizations and companies that will help you find a plan that works best for you for repayment. But yeah, we are seeing this consistent issue of borrowers not being able to manage. Also, we lack financial literacy as young people, I think, especially when we take out loans in the first place. I mean, we're 18 years old and we don't know enough to take out six-figure loans, yet we take on that responsibility. And there are a lot of services and organizations that are dedicated to helping young people gain financial literacy and learn how their loans work. So AY can also recommend them to you separately if that's something that you are interested in.
So Lisa, can you actually hit on that point? Because I know you had put it in the chat earlier about the K through 12 financial literacy. Like, what exactly is AYA pushing there? What are some of the things that you guys have seen that have worked, that hasn't worked?
Yeah, well, Ali can speak to K through 12 financial literacy after, but something that AYA has been working on is forming partnerships with organizations that dedicate themselves to doing sort of the dirty work behind student debt payment. So for example, we currently partner with a company called Buy Savvy, and they sort of break down the student loan repayment process for borrowers and give them different options to refinance and sort of like give them information about income-driven repayment and other repayment plans. Something that we think about often as an organization is how to help our borrowers manage their existing debt. So we're sort of twofold in the fact that we advocate for solutions to the debt crisis, but then also secondly, help our existing members that have debt right now manage that debt better. So I think it's important that while we're advocating for these sort of sweeping policy level solutions, that we are also focusing on helping young people manage the burden that we've taken on. We're looking at another partnership with a company called SoFi, which I can put in the chat after, and they do similar work they do financial literacy workshops, sort of teaching people what it means to take on a loan, like what that implies, and all of the information that one needs to better manage their loans.
And I want to point out that there are good actors in this space and there are bad actors in this space. And absolutely. So, we as organizations need to understand that there are going to be that there needs to be a heavy vetting process on those kinds of refinancing organizations or those kinds of companies that do that kind of work. And so just putting out the disclaimer that not all of them are created the same. And so again, this is part of the financial literacy piece. And I think that even before getting to that place, right? Like, I think I was the person who put this in the chat about the importance of financial literacy in K-12, like these career decisions and children saying, oh, I want to be a doctor, and then following the career path to be a doctor, but maybe they're a first generation college student who doesn't have a family to fall back on that has resources to, take on the monumental cost that it is to become a doctor in this country. And so and then again, that's why we have things like PSLF, where it's like, okay, you want to go into this public service field and, the government wants to help. But I think that that in a child's or even at 6 or 7 years old, there are ways to start incorporating basic financial literacy so that by the time they are a sophomore in high school and they're meeting with their college counselors, they grasp the severity of what a loan debt actually means, as opposed to, oh no, I'm filling out a FAFSA form, but I'm also taking out this, and I don't know the difference between a grant and a loan. And the school counselors, they mean well and they're so underserved, but that's not their only job, right? And so I think that the capacity needs to be built out at the K-12 level and the infrastructure to ensure that school systems understand that what they are producing is a crop of children that are taking on adult risk. And I think that if we don't have that shared responsibility in those earlier years, then we're doing our next generations a disservice. And so that's part of what we advocate for. Yes, I certainly wasn't taught how to budget in school. I'm seeing that I'm like, even still, I'm not that great at it, right? Like my husband's like, really, Ellie? Like, I'm not even gonna get into that because I'll get myself in trouble. But these are real consequences. These have real life consequences, and we shouldn't continue to have to put Band-Aid after Band-Aid after Band-Aid, because that becomes an infected wound. If we don't treat the wound and the cause of the wound, we will end up with what we have, which is $1.7 trillion in insurmountable debt. That we're talking about an economic stimulus package right now, right? How could these people who have been so disserviced by our system passively contribute to an economic stimulus and recovery if they're worried about where their next meal comes from? And again, to Malcolm's point, like, these shouldn't be and ors. This should be an and situation. I am able to get an education and healthcare and social security and a job. These are basic human rights that we're talking about for our American citizens. And I'll get off my horse now.
Well, actually, if I could maybe add on to that, because I think it's a horse that we all should be on, because, YI is also in the space of providing some of that financial literacy and financial education. And what we see when we not only teach the young people in our Young Advocates program, our leadership program, but also when we then train them to go out and give this same financial literacy training about what student debt actually is, about how you can pay it off, about like what PSLF is, about like, hey, there are people trying to scam you, is that people don't know anything. Like I have had, like, I've been out of school for, I don't know, like 3-4 years. I didn't know like any of the information that was in that financial literacy training. It was all brand new. It is so opaque. And then, you add on to that there are young people or borrowers who are coming from families where English is not the language that they speak at home, or, they are the first generation in their family to go to school. Like, this information is not readily accessible to them. So there's so much that we can and should do, societally and culturally, to make this information easier for people to absorb. We can put it in K-12, we can, put it in college, but I think also, there is really an onus on public, not on public service, on loan servicers to make this information really easy to find, and there's no incentive right now for them to do it.
Now, Jesse, there is a question in the Q&A.
Okay, so the question we have here from Layla is she'd like to hear more about coalition building. And this is something, Allie, you talked about extensively, between traditional students who entered their 4-year degree at 18 and adult students who may be attending school part-time, supporting their job. What's the #1 policy we can get behind that forms a coalition between these groups at both a state level and a federal level? And what kind of organizing can we do together that accounts for the different set of obligations we have?
Awesome question. So my favorite thing in the world is coalition building, because it literally is how policies get moved and how people come together, and sometimes even come together over a disagreement. So in relation to, is the question posted somewhere that I can answer the multiple parts?
Yeah, if you go to the Q&A at the bottom of the screen there next to.
Oh, hold on. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure I'm answering all of the parts of the question. So there is an organization called the Higher Learning Advocates that AYA recently partnered with, and it is exactly that. It is a coalition of groups and of the non-traditional students who are again, America's, I want to say it because they are the new traditional students, right? And so we keep thinking of the traditional students as these typical freshmen that everybody has in their mind, but the majority of today's student are exactly that. And so I think a #1 policy that we can get behind, there are so many, and it really depends on what they're trying to achieve, right? And so I think we're going to see some big bills introduced on reforming the higher education system. As I mentioned in the past, Ed and Labor under Democratic leadership in the House, has put out the College Affordability Act, and that was something to address, better pathways, affordable education, higher education, accessibility, and so I think that in terms of building a coalition, you can start with your friends, right? Like, building a coalition doesn't need to be something formal. AYA has an ambassador program that if you want to become an ambassador and, form a weekly meeting with like-minded individuals, or for instance, schedule your own town hall or appearance at a town hall and get together, obviously in COVID safe ways. I think town halls are being, even this town hall, but official town halls where your local members are at, right? I think that coalitions can form very organically, or you can join formal coalitions that exist, like the Higher Learning Advocates organization, which is highlighting who the non-traditional traditional student is today. And I think that at the state and federal level, right, policies are going to be different. A lot of times it's easier to move things. So for instance, Malcolm had mentioned a student borrower bill of rights. California was able to pass that. I think there's been both in the House and Senate various versions of a student borrower bill of rights, but it hasn't moved at the federal level because the process is just so different there. And so I think understanding the landscape that you want your coalition to operate in is incredibly important. And the one thing that can tear a coalition apart faster than it's formed is not having like a singular, very pointed mission. And so I would say start small rather than start big on like, what is this specific issue that we are coalescing around, because there's a million different coalitions for a million different things. And then what kind of organizing can we do together that accounts for the different set of obligations? So again, this is a great question. We have tons of platforms, right? Like, whatever works for you. If you operate solely in Google Docs and you want to start getting a data dump of people's thoughts, do it in a Google Doc. If you want to do a Zoom, do it in Zoom. If you want to meet in a social distance circle in a park, because face-to-face and like telling those stories you think will be more impactful, do that. I would say right now we have the luxury of doing all of these things that work for us. And again, we just helped in Maryland a student who wanted to take AYA's materials and resources and start his own AYA ambassadorship. And so we've helped him coalesce a bunch of his students and colleagues to start a mini AYA chapter so that they can get their voice out on campus about the issues that we're pushing at the national level. And so I think all of that is important to do. And again, speaking to this, the more people we inform, the more allies we have.
Yeah, and to speak to that point, as Ellie was saying, there are different levels of organizing, right? And I think joining AYA, joining YI, like collaborating with YI is like a great move, because we represent borrowers and constituents from so many different demographics and locations, situations, and it sort of provides you with a trustworthy community, which you can then communicate with to come up with solutions for the issues that you share experiences on. So while you can still be advocating in your community, and as Ali said, we have resources to help you with that, it is also helpful to join larger advocacy organizations that fight on your behalf and also connect you with other people who are having a similar experience, even though the demographic might be completely different. So I think, it's important to recognize the role that we have in doing that work for you, and how that kind of serves as a coalition in and of itself.
And Layla, I'll just add two more to the list that Ali gave. I think, one, implementing models of support that address students' needs beyond just tuition, I think is critically important, right? So covering the cost of books, covering the cost of transportation, covering the cost of food. I think at the state level, certainly, we have a regional office in New York, and they work with CUNY, the City University of New York. And CUNY has a program, it's called the CUNY ASAP program, which stands for Accelerated Study in Associate Program. Wow, that was pretty good. And what they do is, it's a pilot program and they cover all of your basic needs. And what we found is those students who go through this CUNY ASAP program also completed their degrees faster. They led to improved job prospects and earnings. And research has found that when you combine tuition support with mentoring and money for expenses, you actually have a greater long-term trajectory in your economic and wealth generation, wealth building. So I think that's like one area at the federal level that is being piloted and talked about at the federal level right now in light of COVID. So that would be, wraparound support and services. I think the second thing, which is not lost on me and probably many young people right now, is ensuring students' mental, emotional, and physical health are met, and at the universities that they go to, it's incumbent on them to provide those services. And so I think supporting students, right, it goes beyond basic needs and wraparound services. I think there's this generational trauma that's being brought on by COVID that's going to echo and reverberate for years beyond 2021. And so I think further campus-based health initiatives really is something at the federal and the state level that higher education advocates can get behind. So that's my 2 cents.
And if I could actually maybe add a few more cents just to this, because teaching young people about how to organize is, I think, one of the most important parts of my job. It really, everybody has listed a lot of great ways to get involved, a lot of great issues to get involved around. But I think really at the heart of any organizing push that you're going to do is get to know the people around you. If you're on campus, get to know the people on your campus. Talk to the people in your classes, talk to the people that talk to people you don't know yet, and just ask, what is important to them? What do they need to succeed? Find those commonalities, because that's where you'll find the things that you want to advocate around. And I think you will probably see that it will be, some of these things that we've already brought up, but you really, you can't organize without building those relationships. And so start doing that if you even think you want to do this in the future, because it will never serve you badly.
And we can help you with that. We love to introduce our members and connect them, and also invite people to be members and give people the tools they need to then organize in their communities. So please do that work, and we are here to support you.
Jesse, do you see we have another comment from Shannon? She's speaking to my heart.
She's speaking to your heart. I think I see it here. Looking for a new Bill of Rights that sets up a laser-focused prevention on the free market's failings between transition from colleges to the labor market. So I think what you're getting at is, should universities and colleges be on the hook or have some skin in the game to make sure that their graduates have an opportunity to succeed in the labor market? I think that's where we're getting at.
Yeah, I think this comes back to the accountability conversation, right? Like, we need very specific measures in place to ensure that higher education institutions are accountable to their students. We need metrics, we need numbers to see how students are faring after graduation, if their degree is worth it, if they're receiving a quality education that then translates to, job training and the job that they're looking for when they do spend the 6-figure debt. And a lot of what we advocate for is accountability and transparency, so that higher education institutions are required to provide those metrics and have better channels of communication with students to ensure that they are providing the services that they're meant to provide.
I think something like that already exists, Shannon. So one of the bills that we were advocating at Young Invincibles for last session, which had broad consensus among students, colleges, universities, employers, policymakers, probably your mom, your brother, your sister, your aunt. It's called the College Transparency Act. Current law prohibits the federal government from actually collecting and reporting on accurate data on student outcomes at each and every college and university in the United States. And so I think, to Lisa's point, right, without this information, students and families aren't empowered to like make well-informed choices about their education. And then with that, they don't know if there is going to be that return on investment. So the College Transparency Act did not pass in the 116th Congress, despite all this broad support. I think, to Allie's point, because we didn't see a higher education reauthorization package come together, but it is slated to be reintroduced this year. I believe the sponsors of that were Senator Durbin, Raja Krishnamurthy, Cory Booker. I think there's a few others on there, but I mean, this was a bipartisan bill, and if it gets passed, and when it gets passed in the 117th Congress, I think that'll go a long way to answering your question.
Absolutely.
Well, I think that may be all the questions. Of course, it's almost 8 o'clock on the East Coast, so you guys are rock stars for doing this. I just think it's been incredibly helpful to understand, and you know, just I think we all can agree that there is a definite shift happening, and you know, there's no greater voice in the young adult to not only voice their opinion, advocate for the opinion, but truly act, take action. And I'm so grateful to know about the work Young Invincibles is doing in AYA. We will share this across a much broader community. And I don't know, Jesse, if you want to have closing comments or anything to thank the audience.
You know, I think, I want to just steal a note from Allie's page. And I think if you're going to be on the sidelines, I think you shouldn't be afraid to get your hands dirty. You have everything at your disposal in this phone. You have everything in front of you with a toolkit that Malcolm has shared with you on how to be your own advocate. And I think the technology that we have allows us to meet our lawmakers and our elected representatives where they are and hear from us. They are duly elected to represent us, and you have the voice and you have the power to shift the conversation. And so I'm so excited for all of you for joining us for the last hour and a half, 2 hours. Again, I want to thank Allie, I want to thank Malcolm, Jamae, and Lisa, and Tiffany on the back end. I want to thank all of our attendees. And again, please reach out to Young Invincibles and the Association for Young Americans. We're here to advocate on the behalf of young people across this country.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming and for engaging in discussion with us. I feel like we all learned a lot in these couple last hours. Yeah, and I'm excited to hear from you into the future. Feel free to reach out to AYA, to either me or Ali with any questions. Yeah, and thank you, Jesse, so much for moderating and being a great leader of the discussion.
Great job.
Thank you guys. Have a great night.
Bye.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.